Despite all this loss and perpetual convulsion, unable to understand the true complexities of our fractured universe. But Lord knows the anxiety that ran through our minds, the unanswerable questions that begged answers a young mind could never comprehend. An excerpt from page 56 of Run Elvin by Gabriel Ndayishimiye. Welcome to P English Literature, a YouTube channel that conveys Amazon, Goodreads, blog, and video book reviews coupled with interviews with authors. It's a perfect channel for book lovers, authors, and writers generally. P English Literature, the exact channel for you and me. Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel and to the review of Run Elvin by Gabriel Ndayishimiye. This book is a memoir that had me, feeling contemplating. It's a sorrowful story. It details the adventure of the author growing up as a refugee in different African countries. It is very sad. It is full of, heart-wrenching experiences. Experiences that are quite very terrible, horrifying, and at some point I empathized with the author because what he wrote, it's very, very deep. The experiences he passed through, the situation that surrounds its childhood, his growing up, the trauma, the psychological effects are just, very exceptional. And I really enjoyed this novel and I find it, very great. Okay, before I talk about this book, my review of this book, it's actually going to be a spoiler-free. I don't want to talk too much about it. It's actually a memoir. Its theme is more particular into the African scene, part of which expound on the author's journey to Canada and, a lot of things encapsulated in it. It is very profound and it's a sort of book that I think would be a resources to students in high institution, students in secondary school in some countries like Malawi, Tanzania, and some other neighboring countries in Africa, even beyond Africa. So before I talk about this book, I'd love to read to you the synopsis, but it's the description of the book on Amazon. So I'll be reading to you. I term it as a synopsis, so I'll be reading that to you. This was my first experience with the urgency of fleeing, that's the author speaking here, in the most immediate and literal sense. It was only then that I could fully imagine the terror felt by my family and other refugees during their escape from Rwanda in the 1990s. When they resisted forced repatriation by hiding in the forest of Tanzania, in that breathless moment on the tarmac in 2002, I felt the visceral terror of what it really means to be a refugee, just as they had, terrorized by the harsh realities of being nationless, propelled forever onward in flight. It is very deep. The story is very empathetic, and at some point I felt the pain of the author, and I'm very, very excited. I'm so happy about this book. It's the kind of book that I think would help us to look into the struggle that most refugees undergo, the struggle, the pain, the psychological effect that most asylum seekers pass through, not only in Africa but in some other part of the world. Before I proceed on my review, I'd love to read to you about the author so you can have an idea of who the author is. So, about the author. Gabriel Ndayishimiye is a writer based in London, Ontario. His writing focuses on refugee stories and representation of exile experiences. He critiques the neo-colonial and racialized knowledge structured on which the international refugee system is based. His first book, Run Elvin, contains multitude. It is at once an expertly crafted history lesson on the causes and consequences of the genocide, expansive three-dimensional account of one man's refugee experience in all its trauma and triumph, and a love letter from father to son on the power of will, hope, and self examination over the darkest echoes of history. Gabriel is also the chief executive officer and founder of LivenBooks. He created LivenBooks to attract the growing number of refugee and immigrant intellectuals who are writing about displaced people and the historical impact of the colonial experience in so many countries. Many of these writers, like Gabriel, have tried to find traditional and even niche publishers, but it is such a competitive market. He has made it its mission to create a new and inclusive space for this writer to get their works published. That's the short description about the author. And when I come to know about LivenBooks, I felt that it's a kind of a very sort of a positive publishing firm that asks to particularly deal with the publication of stories of non-fiction, story of people that are displaced, of refugees, just like this book, Run Elvin. Other books that are quite related to it. This book details the life of the author growing up as a refugee in his country, Rwanda. The story actually started during the Rwanda genocide. It happened during the time when gruesome killings forced most Rwanda to seek asylum in some other neighboring countries. At this time, the author was a little bit still young, so his mother, together with other relatives, flee Rwanda into Burundi to seek for refuge. After some months, extended conflict in Burundi and Rwanda forced them to seek for refuge in Tanzania. Once they get to Tanzania, it was a different story entirely. They lived inside a particular refugee camp until the time whereby the government of Tanzania announced a forced repatriation, that most people should go back to their country. So once they insisted this forced repatriation, they had to flee from Tanzania into Malawi. The journey to Malawi is full of dread. It is horrifying. It is tragic. It is very saddening. Even the fact that they lived in the refugee camp, it's full of some sort of bad experiences, because the author, that's Gabriel, was still very young at this time. So it fixed a lot of bad issue. It fixed a lot of problem growing up. So growing up in the refugee was quite dreadful on the author. He struggled to get enrolled into primary school, and even when he did, it was full of struggle, because he actually loved education. He's a very bright child right from time, and the fact that he did not have a father at that time had a kind of a psychological effect on him. So growing up was quite horrifying on him. Sometimes he would look at, like he wrote in this book, and sometimes he would look at some kid running to their father at evening, and he would feel jealous, like, oh. And sometimes he was having a conversation with someone, and the person was inquiring about his father in a way that it upset him. So all this kind of psychological effect, and the fact that he grew up in a refugee camp and he did not have a father at this time, and the fact that no one is actually interested in providing his basic needs as a child, create a kind of a psychological effect on him. But that aside, I also love to mention that Gabriel's mother, experienced quite some sort of terrible stuff in the novel. Some part of the book, she made mention. She was trying to explain to the author that, okay, this is what happened to your father. This is what happened, when the genocide started. That's when I did not hear about him anymore. And when I come here to be able to cope with the language, which is quite very strange, I had to marry another man. That was how I gave birth to your sister. So the man left her, and she was full of psychological effect. There was a point that I find quite very empathetic. That was a part that where they're taking their picture together with the sister, and it was like in the evening I posed for a final photo with my siblings, and I did not know that this is actually gonna be the end of us meeting together. And the mother looked into his eyes, and it was like he wrote that he could feel the empathy in her eyes, in her face, speaking that, oh yeah, I don't want to leave you, but we just have to do it. There's a sort of funny issue that happened in the train where they were traveling, I think from Tanzania to some part of Malawi. And someone of them, which is actually Rwanda like them, was visited with a psychological effect and started pointing them out one after the other that, oh, these are the people we are traveling together. And they had no option than to flee. Some of them escaped to the window, even while the train was moving. I think at this time it was moving in kind of a slow motion. So all of that made a kind of a bad notion. I created kind of an empathy in my heart towards it. And another thing was the fact that sometimes when Gabriel goes to school, I wrote of a particular place whereby he did not have a uniform. He had to wear the uniform of his grandfather, which is actually bigger than him, and the trousers are a little bit bigger than himself. So he looked quite different from every other student in the classroom, and this alone made him feel somehow bad until he wrote to his uncle who lives in town, and he had to send him another clothes. Even despite the fact the clothes is still bigger than him because it's just a young boy. Imagine a young boy wearing the clothes that belongs to an elderly person, so it's gonna be very, very obvious on him. Until a friend of his was able to lend him one of his uniforms. All this when I'm mentioning actually looks part that I find quite full of empathy in the book. And I love the fact that the book, it's like an historical novel. It's like an historical memoir. I love the fact that it's a personal account of the author's life growing as a refugee in some African countries. I also love the fact that it expounds on the effect of colonization in Rwanda. Colonization in Rwanda is just like colonization in other African countries, which have a sort of a bad, negative disadvantages on the citizen and the country itself. And this part of the book reminded me of Chinua Achebe's There Was a Country, which is actually a personal history of Chinua Achebe detailing his experience with the Biafra War. So Gabriel's book is like a personal account growing as a refugee in some African countries. So that about that, there's some point, or so there's some part whereby Gabriel struggled to pay a kind of an examination which is very, very cogent. So he tried his possible best until his grandmother's friend lent him, but at that time it was already late. But one thing I can say about this is that Gabriel actually passed through some sort of difficult story. There was a point that I found very unbelievable, and that was when his uncle invited him to the town. He was working as a sales representative in a grocery shop. Gabriel is actually someone who is driven because he lived in the refugee and he had heard some story of some people who from a refugee traveled abroad. So he felt that education is the only way that he can escape the torment, the horrific experience, the shame and the humiliation in the refugee camp. So he was very determined to go to school. He was very determined to further his education. When our uncle invited him to the city, worked for him, so another uncle, like a cousin, came visiting them. So from here, they sent him an errand and he refused. And from here, they started bullying, they started fighting. This fight was led him back to the refugee camp. And I was like, what kind of uncle does that? While I read this part, I was quite intrigued. Anyway, I think it's something that's very rampaging. It's something that is quite rampant because a lot of people that actually do that, irrespective of relation or anything. But one thing I find very intriguing about Gabriel's book is the fact that most of the experience he passed through, most of the ugly circumstances that he experienced, it's a look into what most Africans are passing through. And he wrote of a particular place whereby some Africans, some young, vibrant, brilliant Africans, find it very difficult to attain higher education, which is actually a case that is not only pertaining to Rwanda or Malawi or Tanzania or Burundi alone. It is something that is quite very rampaging in most African countries, and that is very true. As most bright intellectual students find it very difficult to further the education because of one thing or the other, leading some circumstances surrounding it. And even those that manage to get themselves out, the job opportunity is very scarce. So in my mental apprehension, this book does not only detail the life of the author. To me, it seems like a look into what most Africans are passing through in Africa. Because most of the content that was expounded in the book even had me resonating on some of my yesteryears, and I jotted some quote that I was going to imbibe later in my life. Even though the book is a memoir, even though it's a sort of an historical book, even though it's delved into colonization, even though it delved into the genocide, the 1994 Rwanda genocide, and some other things, I still find it like a look into what most Africans pass through in some African countries. And this section can actually be thought of as a movie play, and because of the level of raw emotion, empathy that is instilled in it. Considering the historical account expounded in this book, considering the fact that it expounds on the 1994 Rwanda genocide, which I find quite enthralling, and this part made me remember the American movie titled Sometimes in April, which expounds on anti-Tutsi racism. That movie, you need to watch it, it's very grievous. It's a story of two brothers that Edwin captivated. This fact, coupled with other facts, made me jot some questions, which I was looking forward to asking the author eventually if I'm able to schedule an interview with him on this channel. And the fact that this book also resonates in some sort of racism, some sort of ethnical racism, and the fact that some parts are somewhat spiritual. However, I love the author's transparency in telling a story. His storytelling techniques is very distinctive, and the fact that it's written in a first-person point of view add a kind of a solemnity to the way each paragraph is written, in a way that is able to instill empathy and bring out all the emotion that the author felt, being transferred into the book completely. This book also made me remember the notorious, the popular, famous African migration to Europe, whereby some people fled to Sahara and crossing through the Atlantic Ocean came up in the news. And even if you go on YouTube and type African migration to Europe, you would find all the information coming out. Some of them who started the journey could not end it. Some of them died on the road. Some of them died as a result of bad health, being exposed to the Atlantic Ocean weather. Some people died in the Sahara. Some were abused, tortured, raped. The list is just endless. Some even died of some unimaginable disease, which was quite very gruesome. And this part may be resonating on the sort of pain that most African migrants who are seeking for asylum, who are seeking for greener pasture in Europe, on the go. But I would love you to want to check out how Gabriel survived this. I find the book inspiring, and I really love it because it speaks to me in person, and it's very motivating. That's not the fact that it's a memoir. I find it very motivating, and that's one of the facts whereby I love reading non-fictions. I love reading real-life stories. I love autobiographies, and I love stories that would pull me in as a reader, that would have me thinking long after I've read it. I would love to leave you to want to check out how Gabriel survived this, how he arrived to Canada. I was able to cope with the ugliness in the refugee camp. And this was the fact that it passed through some kind of horrifying circumstances and situation that I would not love to expound in this review because of my attempt to keep it spoiler free. I'd just love you to want to check out for yourself how the author survived this. Growing up as a refugee is quite heinous. It is very, very terrible, and most people died on the course of the way, while the people who saved them were able to survive it, and they have a sort of an heroic story to tell. This is just a brief overview of the works that is contained in Run Elvin, and you're gonna find this book with what I've described and even beyond what I've described. The margin of emotion instilled in it is life-saving, it is empathetic, and it is very, very educative. And I think lovers of memoir, lovers of history, lovers of non-fiction, lovers of autobiographies are gonna find absolute pleasure reading this book. It's a kind of book that I solely recommend, and not just for people in Southern general. I think everyone, lovers of literature generally, would find pleasure reading through Run Elvin. The story is very reflectional. It is very profound. It is empathetic, like a look into the life of most refugee. It's like a look into the struggle of a refugee. It's like a look into life in Rwanda and some other neighboring countries. Born out of mental acuity, I'll begin to think over this book over and over again. And this is just the first book in the trilogy of this book series, Run Elvin. I look forward to reading the second book series and the third book series if I have the privilege. So this book is very amazing. It is I don't want to spoil it. I don't want to talk too much about it. I just want to give you a short video book recommendation of the book so you can want to pick it up on Amazon. And if you'd like to get a copy of this book, I left a link in the description part of this video for you to get a copy directly on Amazon. It is very amazing. It is historical. It is shockingly absorbing. It's a tearful story of a destined lad. So, if you watch this video to this point and you're yet to click on the subscribe button, I want to urge you to please click on the subscribe button over there. Don't forget to turn on your notification bell so you can get notified anytime I release a new video. I'm still editing some books, so I just thought to come up and review Run Elvin because I actually read it within the course of the week and I thought to, leave a review of it today. So I'll be coming back to reviewing a book fully by February because I still have some projects going on. Before then, I so much need to appreciate those people who have subscribed to my channel during my time of staying up. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much for watching my video book review of Run Elvin by Gabriel Ndayishimiye. It is very, very deep. It is historical. It's a sort of book that I think should be vastly read in some African countries, in Rwanda, in Burundi, in Tanzania, and even beyond. It's a sort of book that would help in the preservation of the African cultural heritage. It is very amazing and I absolutely love it. Thank you very much. See you in my next video. Goodbye.